This musical moment is brought to you by Brian Bird from We Sell WNC Keller Williams Mountain Partners.
Heartbreak with rose-colored paint.
Hi, this is Brian Bird, and I love Hendo. I love this town, I love our community radio station, and I love all of the locally owned businesses that have taken the Safe Hendo pledge while encouraging the community to embrace the 3 W's. Wear a mask, wait 6 feet apart, and wash your hands.
Brian Bird is a local real estate agent, still doing what he can to support local restaurants in town.
These are our friends and neighbors. And, we want to do anything we can just to help them get through today.
My name is Brian Bird, realtor with the We Sell WNC team of Keller Williams Mountain Partners. If you want to learn more about real estate or this community, email me at Brian, that's Brian with a Y, briansellswnc@gmail.com, or visit WeSellWNCteam.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're the Gathering Dark. I'm Josh.
And I'm also Josh.
And I'm also Steve.
And I'm Steve.
And this is a song by Steve. Right, Josh?
That's right. This one's called Freeway.
Sunday evening in the backseat with my family headed home. Still remember very moment I saw you for the first time. I yelled pull over to my father. He stopped the car on the side of the road. Then they saw you running scared and alone. Daddy, Daddy, can we keep him? You know how long I've always wanted a friend. Mommy, Mommy, I'll take good care of him from right now till the end. I heard my dad say, you can't just leave him. Next thing I knew, you were getting in the car, in the back seat, riding free. My new best friend and me. Sunday evening in the backseat with my family heading home. Still remember very moment I saw you for the first time.
people should show other people their art and like show the world their art. Like get inspired, and then they get to realize that they have art here and that people will like it. My name is Alexander and I'm 10 years old.
It took me, literally, to get this pattern to where I liked it, what I saw. It took me 6 months.
He did a fantastic job. He even learned how to hollow them out so they don't go up in the kiln. And yeah, he's a fantastic sculptor.
Wings, the tail, and the beak with a line for the mouth, and I made the eyeballs blue.
So how does this apply to what you're learning in school?
It's like area, perimeter, and shapes.
Thank you to our 2020 Art on Main judges, Katie Gia, Joyce Zavaskis, Patrick Dennis. Now please welcome our 2020 Art on Main, the virtual Fine Art and Fine Craft Fair presenter, actress Judy Greer.
Honorable Mention Awards: Fine Art, Diane Dean, Acrylic. Fine Craft, Jim Norton Jewelry. Most Original, Janet Lesenby Pottery. First Time, Deb Major, Mixed Media. Second place, Fine Art, Brian Keene, Pastels. Second place, Craft, Stuart Glassman, Pottery. First place, Fine Craft, Roberto Bengeochea, Jewelry. First place, Fine Art, Walter Arnold Photography. Best of Show, Jamie Whitcliffe, Glass. Congratulations to everybody.
I got started in photography kind of out of a necessity to create. I lived in Florida. I ran a small home-based recording studio for a few years. When I moved to North Carolina, the house that I moved to happened to be kind of under the final approach for the regional airport, and it was not really conducive to a recording studio setting with airplanes flying overhead. So I one day went out to the local Best Buy and picked up a camera, made a commitment to go out on the weekends when I had free time and kind of explore the region. As I was out exploring these beautiful places, I would go home and I'd post the images online and I'd research more places, but then I'd see that everyone else with the camera was also taking the exact same photos that I was from the exact same locations of the exact same beautiful waterfalls and sunsets. When I was visiting some friends and family back down in Florida, we were driving around looking for some interesting places to photograph down there and ran across this old airplane graveyard. A friend and I pulled over and there was a little break in the fence. So we kind of wiggled our way through and started exploring this small little piece of land with these airplanes. And that moment right there for me just instantly got me hooked, like a kid in a candy store climbing up inside these old airplanes And so from that moment on, I knew that that's the type of subject matter that I wanted to photograph. So getting access to these old buildings is probably the hardest, most difficult part of what I do. When I first started off, and it was still just a hobby, I would obviously sneak into a lot of different places. Once I started doing this full time, I tried to commit to doing it as legally as possible. At that point, I started to reach out to the owners of these buildings. I'd also found great success over the years in partnering with historic preservation groups. When I first started off full time, I went on a road trip with one of my best friends, and Memphis was one of the first stops on our road trip. I'd actually reached out to the preservation group to get some contact info from the owners, and we were able to photograph one of the first buildings that I shot there was the Tennessee Brewery. I ended up sending all the images that I took from these buildings back to the preservation group, and they just loved the idea that they could share these images, which were kind of captured and created to showcase the beauty of these places, and to paint them in a positive light. And over the last 10 years now, every time I go to Memphis, they have a different preservation project, a different building that they're trying to save. And it's been great to be able to watch some of these buildings, such as the brewery, and actually the church, which is on the computer screen back here. Both of those locations now have actually been fully restored and have been, brought back to life. And so it's been fascinating to kind of watch these places come back to life and also be a small part of the preservation efforts that are put in to save these places. Grossinger's Resort was definitely one of the places that kind of helped me form the overall vision that the whole series would eventually kind of come into. And just everywhere you looked, it was like you could just stand there and look around and you felt like you were the last person on earth. But at the same time, you could imagine the people that were once there and just the bustling, thriving nature of the resort. And this was one of the most famous Jewish resorts up in the Catskills that films like Dirty Dancing were inspired by. So many comedians got their start on the stage at Grossinger's. Musical acts from all over the country would go through there, and even different sports figures would go and spend the summers training there. When we were first there in 2009, it was relatively untouched by people. It was basically, there was moss and grass growing up on the tile work inside the pool. The old lounge chairs that people would have sat in around the pool were still sitting there. You could see the beautiful chandeliers and stuff still hanging up on the ceiling. And it was just absolutely spectacular place. About 2 years ago or so, the city actually went in and ended up tearing down everything that was remaining there. The entire place now is gone. Events like that, though, really drive me to be proactive and to get out there and find these places, because in some cases, I'm one of the last people to go through some of these buildings before they're torn down or before they fall down or burn down in some cases. The success stories that we've had with some of these Memphis properties and a few other ones are definitely the exception to the rule. That too often these places just don't get the love and attention that they really need and deserve. Their time with us is limited. From the beginning, I've utilized a photographic technique called high dynamic range photography. And it's not something I use in all of my images, but a lot of these scenes where you have the contrast of an indoor setting or an indoor light versus an outdoor setting and an outdoor light, that creates a very large dynamic range of light in a scene that can be difficult to capture that full range of light with just a single exposure. So what high dynamic range photography does is allows the photographer to capture multiple images that range from very dark all the way to very bright, and then blend those images together into a single file in post-production. And that single file contains all of that light data that you've captured across that full range. And so as an artist, that allows me to kind of go in and balance the light in some of these scenes. When I look at these buildings or the airplanes or anything like that, I don't see a pile of junk. I look at it and I can kind of imagine the stories that these places once held, imagine the people that were once associated with them. And I tried to kind of bring that out in my work. With the case of historic preservation, oftentimes that viewing a property or viewing a scene like that in a positive light can be the impetus that is needed to garner some interest. with restoring a place. If someone can kind of start to visualize the magnitude and the majesty of some of these places. When I first get to a scene, I'll usually put all my camera gear down and just walk around the building without any cameras to distract me. So by not having the camera at all allows me the freedom to just take in and kind of feel the building out a little bit. As I go through the day, I'll actually switch different lenses out. So I'll walk around with the wide angle lens at first and kind of photograph a bunch of wide angle scenes. And then I'll put on a very narrow macro lens and photograph some detail shots. Sometimes when I'm just going for the obvious shot, I try to think of that and say, okay, what's not the obvious shot here? What's the weird shot? What's a weird, funky angle that I can get at, or climb up into, or go down underneath, or something like that, and try to just challenge yourself as an artist to think differently and to not go with just what's the easiest situation. I'm just very thankful every day that something that I've been so passionate about and something that I would have done regardless is also being so well received by other people out there. So it's definitely a blessing. Hi, my name is Walter Arnold. I am a photographer from Hendersonville, North Carolina. And for the last 10 years, I've been creating a photographic series called The Art of Abandonment. You can find all of my work at artofabandonment.com.
I was born and raised in North Dakota, and so was my now wife, but we left there after high school and went to college in Denver, where I went to art school, and she went on to college, but we ended up getting married, and that's 40 years ago this year. So I'm showing my age, but yeah, we pretty much lived in Colorado a long time. We've lived all over the country a little bit, but we ended up here in Western North Carolina about 15 years ago. Bought a beautiful place here with a nice studio that's in the woods, so it's perfect for what we're doing. I did illustration as well during my career. I did a lot of computer illustration. I started doing pastels back in art school, and I kept with them for years. I didn't really sell them, but then a few years before I retired from design, I started doing shows, so I was doing both at the same time. And then it just became a natural switch to just focus on fine art completely. And I'm just drawn to those images, the old black and white photos that we all see from the 30s, and the expressions on people's faces. And, there's just a big story there, but you don't know what it is. And since they're old black and white photos, it even looks more dreary, I think, than it probably really was. But I mean, it was depression. Of course, there was hardships, and that's what inspires me. I just try to capture that essence of it, even though I'm not copying these photos that I find, 100%. I just take the characters and put them in my own backgrounds and stuff, and just try to bring some life to that. I've always been really into color. I use a lot of color, so I'm never concerned to be, accurate with the color necessarily. I'm just trying to create a mood, create an image with that. And even if it's surreal color, it changes the concept of the photo 100%. I also work on a black paper to start with. So when you start putting color on the black surface, something amazing happens. And it's just, you add a second color to that color, and you just start playing with, oranges and reds to me are the most brilliant. They just make a statement. So that's what and I use black too. So, there's a big contrast there. But I start out literally on the computer. I look up, I research old photographs. The Library of Congress is a great database. They have just millions of images, from the 1930s, where they're all, royalty free, not, no domain on them. So, and when I find an image I like, I put it in a folder, and I come back to them eventually. When I want to do a new painting, I just kind of go find another image, and then I decide if it looks better as a vertical or horizontal, and then I really do work up a composition to size, on the drawing table first. And once I have that, that's what I start with. And then preparing the paper is a whole thing for me too, because I start with a white illustration board, and I actually apply a black gesso to it that has sand in it. So it becomes a very textured surface to hold the pastel. And the beauty of that, I love working on black because it makes all the colors pop, but it also as soon as you put the pastel on, these brush strokes start showing through that I put the primer on with. So it's just a technique that I've developed, and it really enhances, I think the art, especially the older looking images I'm doing, it just kind of lends itself to that. That's kind of the process. Yeah, you just have to, literally layer the colors. I work vertically so the dust can fall down into a tray. Pastels are a messy medium until you're done. But yeah, that's about it. And sometimes you don't know when you're done. You have to work. You can't overwork pastels. I guess that's the beauty thing of it. When they're done, they're done. A lot of people haven't owned a pastel before. I think they should really give it a good look because there's something special about the medium. There are qualities to it that you just cannot get with paint. Although it is like paint, but it's so much like drawing and everything else. But I think, that's it. There's pastels I've seen from the 1800s that are still in great condition. So, some people think they might not be permanent because they're chalk basically, but they're very expensive chalk and they're made very well. So they're just like oil paints, really. Since I do these old images from the 30s, I've had more than one person in my booth that has actually started crying when they looked at a piece because it reminded them of their grandmother who had just passed away, and she worked on a farm like that, or she had an old photo of her grandmother hoeing a garden or something, and in a couple of instances they ended up buying the piece, never intending to buy a piece, but it just touched a nerve with them, and that's a really good feeling. Hey everybody, that's Brian Keene, a pastel artist. You can come see my work at www.briankeenstudio.com. That's Kuehn.
My name is Roberto Benguechea. I'm from Colombia, South America. The name of the city is Barranquilla. I came to this country in 1968 without English and without nothing. And I stumbled into a person who had a jewelry manufacturing thing. This man was looking for another designer. He only had one designer in Miami. And she was always consistent, the same designs, the same things. So I was staying in his house for 3 or 4 days. I was on my way back to New York. I had a job with my best friend over there waiting for me. And he asked me if he could ask the women who work for him, that does the design, if I could watch her for 3 days.
Waxing.
Doing the waxing. Waxing is the first thing that you do in the jewelry business. So I went with that woman for 3 days, and I call it spitting bullets because she was talking to me, and now bearing in mind I came from Colombia, don't speak no English, and she's just going like a machine gun to me. So I put her out of my ears, but I pay attention to what she was doing, and so I did pay attention. And after the third day, he says, it's 9 o'clock. I'm going to leave you here. I'm going to give you 10 stones. And you have all the tools in here on this table that other person who you learned from, who were taught to have. And so he says, I'll be back by 7 p.m. Surprise me. Hey, I never done this before. This is not a thing for me. He says, look, I don't care what you say. I'm leaving. I come back at 7 o'clock. Surprise me. Now he says the other woman who does for him, she gave him 3 designs per day. So when he came back at 7, he had 8 designs, and he flipped out because they were totally different than what that other person does. So he says, that's it. You call your friend in New York. You're not going to New York. You're staying here. I pay you. You stay with me. You'll be good. I'll make you a better person. And so I started to work for him, and twice, 3 times the speed that the other women had. And I was so totally different. So we moved in here without a name or without anything. And the first thing that we decided that we were gonna do for our store was the name. And since I get excited by the visions that the Almighty showed me in His creation, I decided I was gonna put the name of my business was gonna be Visions of Creation. So in honor of the Almighty Father, who uh, give me those visions in His creation. So basically, that makes me an imitator, not a designer.
What I have in his marketing is he does the job of 5 people. And I know there's plenty of other artists that do the same thing. They're all creative in their own way. He does the designing, he does the waxing, he does the casting, he does the stone setting, he does the polishing and shining. So he does the work of 4 or 5 people. Because of the knowledge and the skill that he has, you can come in on a Friday morning and meet with him. He'll do the design with you, he'll send you away for a cup of coffee for an hour, you'll come back, he'll have the wax ready and say, okay, I'll have your actual piece ready for you at 4 o'clock the next day, completed. And that happens a lot where they'll make an appointment and they come in town for the weekend and they leave with their piece.
There's really nothing to it. I mean, I landed into it and it was almost like I was born to do this. You know, this man put the pressure on me. He says it's 9 o'clock, he's 8 stones, do 1 design or 2, whatever you think is best. He gave me the freedom. So it just came out to me. I was born to do this. I can do anything and everything. So I don't have a line per se because of that. So many different expertise and different people from different parts of the world, because I was also in contact with people from the Bahamas, from Grand Cayman, and all those things. I was doing designing for them too. And even from some jewelry stores in South America, because all the people from South America come to Miami being the center of the jewelry type of thing in there. You know, you're the continuation of your past, and your past is your past. So from your past, you go into the moment, and from the moment, you go into the future.
He loves the challenge when people just give him a stone or 2 or whatever, and they say, use your imagination and make it yourself, whatever you want, whatever it comes to.
Then I go wild.
That's what he calls a juicy steak. But we've got people that come in all the time that say that people approach them and ask them, is that a Roberto piece? And that is validation right there of his hard work and the years that he's put into it.
It feels awesome, but at the end, it's not important to me really. At the end, I cannot take any of that with me. It's all ego anyways. It feels good, you know, and all these pieces, the last 200-300 years have passed from mother to daughter to a granddaughter or whatever it is. And I would be history. I would be part of nothing. I will not exist anymore, and it will not even be a memory because it is what it is. That's what we go through this world, and we leave empty-handed, just like we came, and without really anything. So you leave your work, and that's what is left. So the sky is the limit. That's why I always say those are the visions that the Creator allowed me to see in His creation.
I'm Barb Glassman, and I've been doing art shows for 35 years. And I live with this amazing man. He's my husband, by the way.
Ah, there it is.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm Stuart Glassman, and I am a retired surgeon. I had been a surgeon for about 40 years. Actually 50 years. And, but I've lived up here in Hendersonville for 30 of those years. I started doing clay here in North Carolina as a hobby, purely as a hobby. And I was doing it. I had made a number of things. And after my first wife and I left each other, I was alone for a few years, and I found Barb on the internet. She was trolling on the internet, and no, actually, when we met, it was in the very early days of internet dating.
Dial-up.
It was dial-up, yeah. There was no Match.com or eHarmony. None of that stuff existed at the time. It was very early. In fact, most sites didn't have pictures. That's how early it was. Anyway, Barb and I met on the internet, and by coincidence, it turned out that both of us were, Barb a professional clay artist and I a hobby clay artist. Once we did start dating, I decided to go with Barb to a show, one of her outdoor shows. She did shows all over the country. So I decided to just go with her. She said, "Why don't you bring some of your stuff?" I said, "What? I just got this, a few little things here, I'm not selling anything." She said, "Bring it along." So we go to this outdoor show somewhere. And I was sitting there at the booth one day. Barb had left me in charge for a while. And a young child came up to the booth and said to me, "I want to buy this tile." And I remember immediately that it was one of my little turtle tiles. And I said, "Hey, great." And I gave him the tile, and he gave me a $5 bill in cash money, okay? There was no Medicare forms, no Blue Cross Blue Shield, none of that stuff, just a $5 bill.
Hooked.
And that's when I became a professional clay artist. That was about 22 years ago. And eventually Barb and I, of course, got married, and then we started doing shows all over the country.
I grew up in suburban Detroit, and I went to Michigan State University. I was in interior design, and to be honest, I was a hippie, and I didn't feel comfortable doing presentations in business suits. So I decided I better try something else. I ended up on top of a mountain in Southwest Virginia, ground all of the wheat to make all of our bread. It was a wonderful time, but then you need to make money. And one of the ways we decided to make money was weaving. In that time, I started doing clay. And I'll share this with you because I think it's important for people to know how something comes out of your soul. We had a child before Caroline who was born and everything was fine. And at 4 months, he was diagnosed with multiple heart defects. And we ended up spending the last month of his life with him at the University of Virginia Hospital in Charlottesville, where he died. And it was very, very difficult. What are you supposed to do with your life? How do you get up in the morning? And something just came to me. I said, I want to get a kiln, and I'm going to get a kiln, and I'm going to get clay, and I'm going to make porcelain earrings. I'd seen some before at the shows that we did. So we turned Evan's bedroom into my clay studio, my little clay studio. And I had a little kiln, which I have today. We don't use it, we use big kilns. But that's where the porcelain earrings came from.
I've always been attracted to creatures that I enjoy. And I decided one day, even when I was taking classes up at Odyssey in Asheville, to include creatures in what I was doing. Now, I didn't know what I was doing, I just decided to. And one of the classes that I took was on tiles. And I decided to make tiles, and none of them were what I make. I decided to do that on my own. I didn't know how to do it actually then. And so they were fairly crude, but eventually I figured it out. And And now my tiles all have creatures. There, let's see, those are my lizards.
It's about 5 inches by 5 inches.
And I have crabs. These are little tiles. I have bigger tiles, and so I've got crabs.
He really does like his lizards, and I tell him, please, no more lizards, but he keeps doing lizards.
And they're all coming out of the tile. Again, it's a little hard to show the perspective, but all of my tiles have that. I have turtle tile.
Go up.
Right there. See, those are turtles. So all of my, whether it's tiles or my platters, all have living things as part of the background or being the centerpiece of the work. It's just evolved that way. I'm not sure I had a notion of doing it, but I know it evolved that way. So even on my bigger pieces, and this is in the bisque form, it hasn't been glazed yet. I think you can see that's a crab, okay? And that will eventually be glazed, and it's about 12 inches in diameter. But that'll be, and that's impressed. That's pressed down into the clay. My pieces are relatively heavy. It's a plate, but it's a fairly heavy plate because I push the crab mold into the clay, and you can't press too hard or it goes through. But the pieces have to be thicker to have that much of an impression in the clay. So that'll be glazed, and he'll be probably somewhat blue. But
one nice thing about his pieces being heavier is that the thermodynamic properties of clay like this, if you put it in a warm oven and you put something you want to keep, they're all usable. They're food safe, dishwasher safe, warm oven safe, microwave safe. If you put the platter in the refrigerator, say you have chocolate dipped strawberries and you want to keep them cold, you put the platter in the refrigerator, put them on it, and it will keep them nice and chilled for quite a while. So it is kind of it's an added bonus. Yeah.
Well, I enjoy making it, I enjoy selling it, and I enjoy the fact that other people appreciate my artwork.
It's all over the world.
It's literally, we've had a lot of European people that have been here at various shows around the country, and they've taken it back with them. So I think it's great. And you?
I just like to make things, and I'm glad folks enjoy it. And it always feels good when somebody comes up to you with your object in their hands and says, I'd like to purchase this. I always say it's like pure capitalism. You get this raw lump of whatever, even if it's fiber, yarn, chunks of clay, you make it into something, you go out there, you show it to the public, they pay you for it. You've gone from the beginning to the end, kind of, and I just love that aspect of it. Hi, I'm Barbara.
And I'm Stuart Glassman. Barbara and I are clay artists. We are Glassman Clay Works.
At glassmanclay.com.
I grew up in Buffalo, New York, but escaped the Northeast and spent most of my career in Atlanta. and ended up in Hendersonville when I fell in love with Hendersonville. So I've been here now for about 10 years. I minored in art and majored in English at the State University of New York at Buffalo. And so I started my career in human resources and became an administrative director for Child and Family Services in Buffalo, and was responsible for their computer systems, and just became fascinated with the concept of computers. And that sort of launched me into, when we moved to Atlanta, I entered a technology company as a technical writer and basically interpreted the instructions that our product engineers would write that no one could understand, and I made them understandable, and became familiar with the Adobe software products. And I realized that there was a path to my art through technology, and I finally landed a job with Adobe. So I worked with them for about 15 years. And started painting more. I actually, when I traveled with Adobe, I used to take my watercolors. And one of the first paintings I ever showed in Atlanta was of the buildings in downtown San Jose where Adobe was located. And this building in downtown San Jose was next to a beautiful church with a big palm tree. So it was really a beautiful scene. And I showed that piece at the Atlanta Art Club's annual show and won an honorable mention. And I thought, okay, I'm finally recognized as an artist. I first started painting in oil and acrylic when I was in school. And then when I started traveling with work, I switched to watercolor, which is really a tough form of art. So I think it's a good one to really become accomplished at before you tackle some other mediums anyway. So really for about 10 years, that was all I did was watercolor. And my sister's an oil painter. She lives in California, and she really encouraged me to try acrylics. She said, you know, you like texture and you want to paint big. I really think you should try acrylics. So I said, okay, I'm going to go for it. So my initial acrylic paintings were really more traditional and didn't have the kind of texture that I have now. And I just kept playing with different styles and different techniques, and I kind of switched to mixed medium. And I embedded papers and fibers and bark off of trees and metal objects and all kinds of crazy things into very contemporary works. And when I started showing more of my work, people would ask questions about, will those things ever fall off of that canvas and that sort of thing. And I thought, okay, I'm going to find a way to do heavily textured acrylic paintings that look like things are embedded in them, but they're not. And that was really what led me to the style that I do now. So all of my texture where I'm pressing in wire and scraping and stamping and just using a lot of things to create texture was really to sort of imitate the mixed media style that I like looking at. So today, everything I do is just acrylic. As my interest in exploring more texture sort of took over, I started working more with palette knives and heavier bodied acrylics. And then I really found the concept of a heavy textured surface before I even painted. So my work became more abstract as I started to add more texture, but I still love flowers. So most of my paintings, if people see them in process, first they see a white, completely textured surface that's very abstract, and it's almost a work of art on its own. A lot of times people will say, oh, I love that white painting, and I'll explain, well, that's just a background and it's just texture. Then I do a very loose brushwork background painting that's very drippy and very abstract, and then I paint my flowers or my cityscapes with heavy-bodied acrylics, and they become more of the representational objects. So it's really an abstract texture, an abstract painting, and then a representational abstract composition on top of that surface. The piece that I feel most proud of in my entire career as an artist is a painting that I did right after 9/11. I planned to do a 5-foot wide by 4-foot tall painting of New York City. I was working in the mixed media mediums then, and I designed out the piece. My plan was to cut wire and paper, and every building in the skyline would be a unique surface. The colors were going to be very muted. And I first did a very small rendition of the painting, and the director of the Art League at that time saw me working on it and bought it before it was even finished. She was actually a native New Yorker. So I finished the little piece, and then I worked on the big piece. And the big piece, the first time it was shown, was at the Huntinghorn Art Market in Hilton Head, and it won an honorable mention. The judge was the curator of the Telfair Museum, so that made me feel really special. And then the next place it was shown was at Spoleto in Charleston, and it was bought by a CPA firm in Washington, D.C., and went there and hangs in their entryway. So it was really a special painting, and it was on my website for a long time. I don't think it's there now. I'll have to get it back up, but it took me months to paint, and I sort of hated to part with it. In fact, I sort of wish I hadn't, but I was naive, and I was really feeling the success of selling such a big piece. So it was probably my first really big sale of something significant. It makes me feel really good when I have sold a piece. Of course, it's great when you sell work, but when the customer sends me pictures of the piece hanging in their home, I do a lot of commission work. A lot of people will buy a piece from me at a show or in the gallery, and then they want something else. And I do a lot of commission work where I use technology actually to do mock-ups of people's spaces. And it's such a great experience to work with someone on a concept and then finish the piece, get it to them, and get to see it. A lot of times I actually deliver it and get to see where it's going to be hung. And then I'll get pictures, and people will say things like, your work just brings so much joy to our home, and that sort of thing. I feel like it's just such a wonderful connection. It's beyond just being recognized as an artist. It's having that sense of making someone feel good and being an important part of the world that they live in. It's very, very gratifying. It really is.
Hi, I'm Diane Dean. I'm an acrylic artist. You can see my artwork at my studio in Art Mob Studios and Marketplace in downtown Hendersonville, and on my website, www.dianedean.com.
Branding is one of the single most important aspects of your business, and it's not just about a logo and a tagline. You need a brand that raises awareness while staying true to your values and goals. A brand that grabs the attention of customers and makes them want to choose you over your competitors. This is Lindsay Simpson of LS Creative. If your business or nonprofit needs to be more visible, recognizable, and memorable, visit lscreative.studio and click Let's Chat. I'm Lindsay Simpson of LS Creative, and you need me.
I'm originally from Indiana, south of Indianapolis, and grew up on a corn farm. Knew that there was something broader in the world than corn. Went to school in Tennessee and came down to Athens, Georgia for graduate school and ended up staying here. I've been here since 1976. I had a gift shop, and I noticed in all of the trade magazines there was a big resurgence of enameling products on the market, jewelry and other things, and it sort of piqued my interest. So that's when I went to John C. Campbell Folk School, took some introductory enameling classes where you enamel on squares and circles and moose-shaped things. And after I got tired of that, I decided to begin to learn how to make my own shapes and objects for the enamel. And then I went to graduate school and learned some other techniques, which led me to now when I mostly do Kambu, which is a Korean technique. At first, when I was in school, of course, I had the latitude to be very creative. Once I got more into marketing my jewelry, I sort of centered in on a design. Right now, it's a lot of nature imagery, although I've always been influenced by nature, but not quite as strongly as I am now because it's a marketable imagery and it just reinforces the I do very repetitive imagery because it markets well. So I don't have as much leeway as I used to. And like I said, I specialize in a technique called Kambu. It's a Korean technique where you take 24 karat gold foil and fuse it to a fine silver, which is 99% pure silver piece of metal. And you do that on an open hot plate with a burnishing tool that you press the two metals together at about 550 degrees, which is a little touchy sometimes. The two metals just bond at that temperature and under pressure. And then I scratch through the gold surface to create the imagery that I want on it, which is mostly right now flowers, botanical imagery. I have about 10 or 15 images that I do. And so once I've etched the image onto the piece through the gold layer, I then put it into a tarnishing substance that oxidizes the silver, which is what's been exposed when I scratch through the gold surface. And then once I get that to the color, it runs through a range of gold into purples and blues. And once I get the color I want on that, I pull it out of the liquid, dry it off, and then I put a sealant coat over the top, which will keep it from oxidizing anymore and changing the color. So it stabilizes the color, and then the piece is done. I also do some other techniques. I do an oxidized sterling technique where I scratch through the surface again, similar to the Kambu, and expose bright, shiny silver, and again, put a finish coat on top, as well as other pieces with sterling and 14 karat gold filled. And a lot of that is textured pieces, and some incorporate pearls. The Kambu pieces and the oxidized sterling pieces, I really do not want you to maintain them. They are pre-tarnished for your wearing convenience, I like to say. If you try to polish them, you will destroy the finish on them. So they need no caretaking, which is nice in this world. The other pieces, the sterling pieces, just the textured pieces with pearls and things will need polishing. The 14 karat gold fill pieces will not need polishing. Graduate school, I made a lot of things that aren't jewelry related that I'm very proud of. I've made lamps and vases and sculptural pieces that I don't market because they're part of my collection. I'm a big fan of arts and crafts period architecture. I'm sitting in an arts and crafts house right this minute, and I have 3 lamps that I've made in this room with me. And so very proud of those. And then I did a series of arts and crafts jewelry back then too. That's some of my favorite work I did that incorporated wood and stones and some enameling on those pieces too, that were a lot more complex than what you see on my website. Although I've started doing some more complex pieces for sale, which then drives the price up. But then the person that's buying it is typically willing to pay it because they know it's a one-of-a-kind piece. So what I enjoy the most about doing this is when people enjoy my pieces and appreciate them for the amount of time and the effort that's put into them, and the aesthetics, especially. If they appreciate the aesthetics, I appreciate that feedback. Every purchase is definitely feedback, and positive feedback, and we really appreciate that. I'm sure all artists would say that. Hi, I'm Jim Norton from Athens, Georgia. I am Jim Norton Jewelry, and you may find me at jimnortonjewelry.com.
When I was about 10 years old, my neighbor had a kiln in her garage, and she had some clay, and she would make things and fire them. And she said, well, come over. And my mom and I went over, and my mom made a little owl, and I made a porcupine. I don't know if you can see him, but pretty primitive, but for a 10-year-old and not any instruction, I thought, well, I've got my start. From there, when I got into high school, my art teacher gave me a name of a man that was teaching sculpture, and he was from Egypt, up on Beverly Shores in Indiana, on the shores of Lake Michigan. And he had a big studio up there, and he taught mostly graduates, students. And I went, she thought I must have been pretty good, but she said, why don't you go up and check this out? And my dad took me up there. So I ended up spending my summers, for 4 summers, working at the Naguib School of Sculpture under Mustafa Naguib. Then I also went into a lot of sculpture and clay work, pottery, when I went in through college. So I've had a lot of pottery and sculpture background. So I've been melting the two together, and one keeps pulling me, and then the other one keeps pulling me. So I can't only do sculpture, and I can't only do pottery. So I have a mixture of both. With those pottery skills and the sculpture background, I was able to put them together. This is one of my earlier pieces. It's a raku piece. Okay, so I'll hold it up, but it has this like U shape, right? This graceful curve to it. These are like one of the top sellers. I have all kinds of leaves. There's a ginkgo leaf. And then I revisited that shape. So here is a leaf bowl. And then the leaf bowl, it has changed, and each one is different. So I have another one here. So you can see the branch work is a little different. Even baby leaves, baby bowls, and philodendron leaves. Here's a pot. This is dry thrown. And I used to make these with long necks, and then they'd flop over and they'd become susical. But then I started putting bird heads on them. So here's the evolution from pot to bird. And my faces have evolved. My teacher, Tom Munich, he would say, take your hunk of clay, and as you work with it, watch it. What is it doing? What's happening? You know, if you like throwing it, well, then throw it. He wasn't one of those that said no throwing clay. He encouraged it, and which was so great as a teacher to encourage you to do something that many teachers would say, I don't want any clay on the wall. Well, he didn't mind the disaster at all. And as I started slinging or throwing the clay and I'm watching it stretch, I noticed if I throw it straight down, it just becomes a lump, thin on the sides and thick in the middle. But if I sling it like snapping a bullwhip, it would drag it and become thin, all even. So as I took a fork and I would put it in a lump of clay and I just stab the ends of it, and if I throw a long string of it, you can see how the edge of this pot has these little, see those 4? That was this fork. Look at how they've stretched and got long. These big ones are created that way as well, and the edges are also. So these are another top seller, and these are a really fun thing. I've made rabbits, and these are a couple, but I make them with the legs up and doing wild things. And what I'm trying to do to get the movement in the clay, I like the idea of keeping movement and spontaneity. Usually the rabbits you might see on somebody's front porch or cement, it's like symmetrical and the ears are exactly the same. I would rather have the wind blowing, or as he tosses his head, the hair would go, you know, the hair or the hare's ears in this case. So I get a lot of movement that way instead of just taking a bottle of clay or the colored slip, which is what they call an ongo, B-E-N-G-O-B-E. I mix my own, and then I have a palette, and I'll put it on. As I paint it on, I'll paint another color, and then I'll take my fingers in the water and I drag my fingers, I flop them, and I try to form the different textures. So this is a one also. It's a swan, but you can see how it gets soft, and then the little cuts through you can see is a sgraffito where I've carved through after it's dried a little bit to show the main color body of the clay, which is a brown. Most of my work is in stoneware, but I do work in porcelain a lot when I'm doing pottery parts. And this is probably one of my earlier works, and I sold a lot of these up in Indiana. So I would have like this easy form here, and then here's my texture on the side of the pot that I've stretched, and then I would tie reeds on them. And I made some little porcelain colored leaves for the front. So all of this stuff the porcelain I've dyed myself, and I have, so it's called colored clay, and I've put those in, and that's evolved. So when I throw now, I try to put some swirls to get that movement and that spontaneity into the piece. So this is stoneware, and you can tell the stoneware has the brown top, where porcelain, when the clay body's shown, you can see the white. I really love the nest. I have some little nest birds, and I'm a painter too, and I like to paint birds and nests and all kinds of birds and wildlife that way. And this is a vulture nest, and I'll see if I can turn it around here. But you can see all that branch work, all that branch work like I did on the oak bowls. Here's the branch work in this nest. Hello, my name is Janet Lesenby, and my business is Stretching Clay, LLC. And you can find me on the web as stretchingclay.com.
Well, I was originally born in New Jersey, lived several places around the country, and then landed in Atlanta, Georgia. Just a little over a year and a half ago, we decided it was time to get out of the city. And the house we had wasn't big enough for a studio, which was really a priority. So we found this house in Fletcher, and we moved. And we built a beautiful studio here in the house where I could teach and do my art. I've been doing that ever since we got here. A little bit more about me. I was a marketing consultant before I gave up my career. And then I started dabbling in this art. I was never taught and never did art until late in life. And I met an artist, and she said she teaches, and I resisted it. But my husband said, you should try it. I said, I've never done art. I've collected art. I was always a big art fan. But then I said, okay, I'll try it. And I've always loved mosaic art. That's been a favorite. So I tried it, and the rest is history. I did it increasingly as a hobby. And then last year, I told my husband, I think this is it. I think I need to go. I hate to say that I'm attracted to whimsy because whimsy sometimes sounds trivial, but I look for joy and happiness in what I make. It fulfills me if it makes people happy. If I look at something, I want it to be colorful. I want it to be happy. And particularly when I started with mosaic shoes. I think, my company, my husband named it, it was called Cinderella Mosaics when I first started, because I felt it was a Cinderella story that I discovered this artistic talent I never knew I had. And I was making mosaic shoes because they're fun and they're whimsical and they're kind of over the top and allowed me to do a lot of decorating, a lot of color, a lot of flamboyance. So when I make pieces, I love to make animals and birds and creatures that I feel need to come to life, to be beautiful. And so I cover them with beautiful clothing and decorations and eyes. And I like working with found objects, and I like working with jewelry and sparkly things. So I've found the pieces that will allow that to come to life. Like the mosaic florals that I make the teeny ones all the way to the big giant ones, because I think flowers are just glorious and majestic. And to make them with upcycled, repurposed things and make them beautiful, I love making mosaic florals. The mirrors, I was taught that art, and I took it to the next level, and I like the idea of decorating those borders so that when you're looking into a mirror, it just has pizzazz, sparkle and pizzazz and beauty. And the mirror is secondary, the mirror is just a part of it. The animals are my heart. I have, around my studio, if you look around my studio, I've got rabbits and cats and birds and pigs and fish, all waiting for me to make them beautiful and come to life. It's just a thing. I don't know. And I feel it sounds crazy, but I feel attached to them. I talk to them, and when I put the eyes on, they have personality. So it's a real emotional connection to the animals. And then I've tried my hand at other things. I've made wall plaques, I've made faces, and I want to challenge myself and keep going. I want to keep making things that are not easy for me. I see something like a black canvas, a bear with no life. And another artist might cover him in brown and black and make him look real. My tendency, my love, is to make him a fantasy bear. So sparkly and interesting and smiling and, just bringing joy, bringing fun. That's my style. I've made a lot of things out of heirloom jewelry that people have had. I was very proud of a piece that a woman came to me with a bunch of her mother's jewelry. She was just put in a nursing home. And I created a piece of a long line of trees, and all the trees were made from the jewelry that her mother was wearing, and she brought it and hung it in her mother's room. I mean, that you can't say anything more about how gratifying that is. And I have made a lot of commission pieces. I have one woman who has given me a piece for both of her children. Now for her, I just made a unicorn for her granddaughter. And she gave me a huge paper mache elk that I covered for her room. I mean, she's just always, so yeah, I do a lot of commission. I love making commission work. I have workshops of different kinds. I have a workshop for the ladies in hats and the big, beautiful birds, which are about 17 inches long. And so that's one workshop. I do birds and other creatures, which is where you can cover any kind of animal. I do mosaic florals, which are kind of signature. I do jeweled mirrors or jeweled treasure boxes. That's one workshop. And I think those are the main ones. And it's usually 2 days. I try to do the what I call the glass slippers workshop, where we make mosaic shoes out of regular normal shoes, and that's 2.5 days. And I try to do that once a year. And I take beginners all the way through to advanced people. You know, it's so much fun. And you know, for the most part, I supply pretty much everything. It depends on the class, but I share all my glass and a bunch of beads and a bunch of broken jewelry and things like that. And we have a ball. You know, we have a great time. I do have 2 workshops available online on my website, DeborahMajorMosaics.com, how to make a mosaic floral and how to make a jeweled mirror or treasure box. They're both available online for purchase, and you will have access to them for the rest of your living days. This art has given me so much joy and so much helped my self-esteem. It helped me feel like what was in me creatively had a showcase, had a place to come out. And when I see people come into my workshops, I want to bring that to them too. And so I'm very encouraging, and I'm very lighthearted about the way I teach. And when they achieve, you know, accomplish something, and they're so happy about it, that's it for me. I mean, that's why I do it. Hi, I'm Deborah Major from Deborah Major Mosaics. You can find my work at www.deborahmajormosaics.com.
Thank you all for joining us for Art on Main, the virtual fine art and fine craft fair. We look forward to seeing you next year in person on Main Street in beautiful historic downtown Hendersonville. Congratulations to the artists, the Arts Council of Henderson County, and the Art on Main Committee for adapting their show and continuing this Western North Carolina tradition. Have a wonderful evening and stay creative.